The cloth trembled in her desperate grip, blood seeping through its edges as she pressed it against her shoulder. "Please," Rina gasped, her voice breaking like dry mesquite in flame. "Don't take it off." But Wyatt Hale had seen too many wounds fester in silence. When his weathered fingers finally peeled back that bloodied pishrick, what lay beneath wasn't just scarred flesh. It was a brand that would resurrect 12 years of buried ghosts and ignite a war he'd sworn never to fight again. I'm about to tell you a story of justice carved from Arizona dust, where a broken soldier's quest for isolation collided with a woman's desperate flight from hell itself. Stay with me through these next hours, friends, and drop a comment about where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this tale of redemption travels. The deer had been perfect, a clean shot maybe 60 yards through the pines. Wyatt Hale had been tracking it since dawn, moving silent as a patchy shadow through the highland brush above Iron Mesa. His Winchester lay steady against a fallen log breath, held finger-curled light on the trigger. The buck's head dipped toward water. Then the gunshot cracked across the valley. Not his. The deer bolted. Wyatt's jaw tightened as he watched 12 hours of patient stalking vanish into the tree line. Some drunk miner probably shooting at phantoms or bottles. He should have ignored it. Should have packed up his rifle, headed back to his cabin, made do with the salted pork for another week. But then came the scream. A woman's voice, raw with terror, cutting through the evening stillness like a skinning knife. Wyatt's body moved before his mind could protest old instincts, flooding back the kind that had kept him alive through 3 years of war and gotten too many others killed. He grabbed his rifle and moved down slope, keeping to cover every sense sharpened. The Arizona territory didn't forgive carelessness. Neither did the memories that haunted men who'd survived what they shouldn't have. Through a gap in the junipers, he spotted her. She stumbled through the dry wash below her dress, torn feet bare and bleeding on the rocks. Dark hair hung wild around her face. One hand pressed something against her left shoulder, a piece of cloth soaked crimson. Behind her, dust clouds rose where riders pushed hard through the canyon, 3 of them, moving with the easy confidence of men who'd done this before. Wyatt's hands found the familiar weight of his Colt .45 before he'd made any conscious decision. The riders were closing fast, maybe 200 yards, and gaining. The woman stumbled, caught herself against a boulder, pushed forward. She wouldn't make another quarter mile. "Damn it all to hell," Wyatt muttered, then fired into the air. The shot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. The riders pulled up, sharp horses wheeling as they searched for the source. Wyatt stepped into view on the ridge, Winchester casual in his arms, but pointed in their general direction, a message clear as scripture. "Evening, gentlemen," he called down, voice carrying that particular tone that suggested both greeting and warning. "Lady appears to be in some distress. Might be time you boys headed home." The lead rider, a thick-set man with a beard like steel wool, spat tobacco juice and squinted up at him. "This ain't your concern, friend. Woman's a thief. Stole from Colonel Kane up at Raven Rock." "That's so." Wyatt kept his voice mild, but his thumb found the hammer of his rifle. "Funny thing about theft, usually involves calling the marshal, not running women down like deer." "Kane handles his own justice," the second rider said, younger, with the kind of nervous energy that made him dangerous. His hand drifted toward his sidearm. "I'd think real careful about that next move, son," Wyatt said. 3 of you, 1 of me, but I've got high ground and a keen dislike for men who chase women through the desert. Your arithmetic might not favor you as much as you think." The woman had stopped running, was watching from behind a cluster of rocks. Even from this distance, Wyatt could see her trembling, see the way she held that cloth like her life depended on it. The bearded rider studied Wyatt for a long moment. Something in the way the ex-soldier held himself utterly still, utterly ready, must have made an impression. "We know these hills, mister. We'll be back with more men." "Looking forward to the social call," Wyatt said. "Now get." They wheeled their horses, the younger one throwing one last glare before they galloped back the way they'd come. Wyatt waited until the dust settled, until he was sure they weren't doubling back, then made his way down the slope. The woman pressed herself against the rocks as he approached, eyes wild, with a mix of fear and desperate calculation. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25, with the kind of face that had seen too much too soon. "Please," she gasped, and her accent held traces of somewhere back east. "The cloth, don't take it off." Wyatt stopped 10 feet away, set his rifle against a rock, and held up both hands. "Not taking anything, ma'am, but you're bleeding pretty bad. I've got a cabin about 2 miles up the ridge. Medical supplies. You can tend to it yourself if that's your preference." She studied him, jaw working, as she fought between trust and terror. "You're not one of Kane's men." "I'm not anybody's man. Haven't been for 12 years. Something in that seemed to decide her. She took a step forward and her legs buckled. Wyatt caught her before she hit the ground, and she was light as kindling in his arms. The cloth at her shoulder had soaked through completely. 2 miles, he said. "Can you make it?" "I've made it this far," she whispered, and there was steel in it. The journey to his cabin stretched like a fever dream. She leaned on him just enough to stay upright, but no more, maintaining that careful distance of someone who'd learned not to trust kindness. Wyatt respected it, kept his support purely functional, his questions unasked. His cabin sat tucked into a grove of ponderosa pines, built solid from local timber with his own hands 5 years back. Nothing fancy. 1 room, a stone fireplace, a bed table, and the medical supplies he'd learned to keep after too many hunting accidents. He settled her in the single chair while he lit the lanterns. In the warm light he could see her more clearly, the exhaustion etched in every line, the way she still clutched that bloodied cloth, the fever starting to glaze her eyes. "Water's in the pitcher," he said, setting it beside her with a clean cup. "Bandages and carbolic in that box. I'll step outside while you—" "No!" The word came out sharp, desperate. "Please, I can't. I need help. But the cloth, there's something underneath. Something you can't. I need your word you won't react, won't ask." Wyatt met her eyes, saw something there that went beyond physical pain. "You have it." With shaking fingers she began to peel away the cloth. The wound wasn't as bad as the blood suggested, a graze along the shoulder, painful but not fatal. But as she pulled the fabric away completely, Wyatt's breath caught. Scars, old ones layered like a map of systematic cruelty, and worse, brands, actual brands, burned into her skin like she was livestock. The pattern was deliberate, methodical. Part of him recognized military precision in the spacing, the organization. He kept his face neutral as promised, but inside, something cold and familiar stirred the same feeling he'd had looking at the aftermath of Juniper Hollow, at what men could do when they stopped seeing others as human. "Raven Rock," she whispered as he cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency. "It's not just a mine. They have people. Hundreds. Colonel Kane keeps them like property, brands them so they can't run. Makes them work till they drop, then buries them in unmarked graves." Wyatt's hand stayed steady as he applied the bandage, but that cold feeling was spreading. "You escaped. I was never meant to be there. I worked in a judge's house in Prescott, heard things I shouldn't have. When I tried to report it, I woke up in Raven Rock with a collar and a brand." "The cloth," he said, understanding. "You're hiding evidence." She reached for the bloodied fabric, and for the first time he saw what had been concealed within its folds. Pages sewn into the lining with careful stitches. Even blood-soaked, he could make out parts of handwritten columns. Names, numbers, dates. "A fragment of Kane's ledger," she breathed. "I've been planning for months. Watching, waiting. This proves everything, the sales, the deaths, the officials he's paid off. 187 souls, Mr. Hale? Wyatt Hale. 187 souls, Mr. Hale. That's how many are suffering in that hell right now." Wyatt finished with the bandage, stepped back. The lamp flickered, throwing shadows across the scarred landscape of her shoulder. Outside, something moved in the darkness. Could have been wind, could have been an animal, could have been something else. "You need rest," he said. "Fever's setting in." "They'll come," she said. "Kane doesn't let people go, ever. Let them come." The words came out harder than he'd intended, edged with something he'd thought long buried. "Been a while since anyone's tried to take something from me." She looked up at him, then really looked, and perhaps saw something in his face that explained why a lone man would face down 3 armed riders without flinching. "You were a soldier." It wasn't a question. Wyatt didn't answer, just moved to the window, studying the darkness. The war had ended 12 years ago, but men like him never really stopped watching the horizon. "My name is Rina," she said softly. "Rina Clarke." "Rest, Miss Clarke. We'll deal with tomorrow when it comes." But as she drifted into fevered sleep, Wyatt noticed something that made his blood chill. There, barely visible at the edge of the branded pattern on her shoulder, was a design he recognized, the regimental insignia of the 3rd Confederate Cavalry, Kane's regiment. The same unit that had burned Juniper Hollow to the ground with families still inside their homes. The massacre that had finally broken something in Wyatt made him walk away from his commission, from the Union Army, from everything. He thought he'd left that world behind. But looking at Rina's scarred shoulder, at the evidence of continuing atrocities, he realized some evils didn't end with surrender at Appomattox. They just found new shapes, new victims, new ways to spread their poison. Outside, a twig snapped. Wyatt blew out the lantern and picked up his rifle. In the darkness, Rina whimpered in her sleep. The ledger fragment lay on the table, blood-stained testament to crimes that wouldn't stay buried. Another twig snapped closer this time. They'd found them already. Wyatt had expected maybe until dawn, but Kane's men were better than he'd given them credit for. He moved silent to the back window, caught a glimpse of shadow against starlight, someone circling marking positions. A scout, just one for now, mapping the cabin, counting windows and doors, probably heading back to report numbers and layout. Standard military reconnaissance, the kind Wyatt had done 100 times himself. He slipped out the back door, became one with the shadows. The scout was good, but not great, kept to cover, moved quiet, but didn't check his 6 often enough. Wyatt closed the distance like a ghost, had his knife at the man's throat before he could cry out. "Real quiet now," Wyatt whispered. "How many coming?" The scout, barely more than a kid, swallowed hard against the blade. 8, maybe 10. "Mr. Boone's leading them. They'll be here at first light." Silas Boone. Wyatt had heard the name in the trading post, Kane's foreman, the one who handled discipline, the one who wielded the brand. "You're going to walk back real careful," Wyatt said. "You're going to tell Boone you found the cabin empty, that we headed north toward Flagstaff. You do that, you live. You don't, they'll kill me if I lie. They'll kill you certain if you don't make it back at all. Choose your odds." He released the scout, who stumbled away and then ran. Wyatt watched him go, then returned to the cabin. Rina was awake, sitting up despite the fever, those dark eyes alert. "How many?" she asked. "Too many for a standing fight. We need to move." She tried to stand, swayed. "I can make it. I know a place. Old Trapper's shack higher up. Harder to reach, easier to defend." He gathered supplies, quick and efficient ammunition, food, medical kit. "Question is whether you trust me enough to follow." She looked at him for a long moment, then picked up the ledger fragment, folding it carefully, despite her shaking hands. "A man who keeps his word about not reacting to these." She gestured at her scarred shoulder. "That's rare enough to gamble on." They slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The climb was brutal, steep grades and loose shale, every step a test of will for someone wounded and fevered. But Rina Clarke proved tougher than her city accent suggested. She matched him pace for pace, breathing hard, but never complaining. Halfway up, as the first gray light touched the peaks, a figure emerged from the rocks ahead. Wyatt had his pistol half drawn before he recognized the face, Talon Greyhawk, one of the few Apache who still moved freely through these hills. trading with both whites and his own people. Wyatt Hale. Talon said, his English precise despite the accent. You're stirring up dust. Not by choice. Talon's eyes moved to Rina, took in the bandages, the fever, the way she held herself like prey ready to bolt. The woman from Raven Rock, the one who carries truth in cloth. Rina startled. How do you? My people watch. We know what happens in that mine. We know Kane moves the operation in 3 days before federal inspectors arrive. 3 days. Rina's voice cracked. But that means 187 souls disappear into wagons scattered to other hells, unless someone stops it. Wyatt felt that cold sensation spreading again. He'd walked away from one massacre. Could he walk away from another? There's a marshal in Prescott, Talon continued. Ethan Ward, the only lawman Kane hasn't bought. I could reach him by tomorrow night if I rode hard. With what proof? Rina held up the ledger fragment. This is just a piece. The full books are in Kane's office, in a safe. Without those, then we get them, Wyatt heard himself say. Both Talon and Rina turned to stare at him. You said Kane's moving everything in 3 days. Wyatt continued, the plan forming even as he spoke. That means chaos, confusion. Men loading wagons, not watching the house. We go in tomorrow night, get the ledgers, get out. The safe. Rina started. Can you open it? Something flickered in her eyes. I watched him once through a crack in the door. I think I remember the combination. You think April 18th, 1832. He said it once when he was drunk, said it was the day that made him who he was. Birth, death. I don't know, but he touched the safe when he said it. Talon looked between them. You're talking about breaking into the fortress of a man with 30 armed guards. No, Wyatt said. I'm talking about ending this. Proper, legal. The kind of ending that puts men like Kane in the ground through a court's noose, not a bullet in the dark. He met Talon's eyes. You ride for Marshal Ward. Tell him to be at Verda Creek Crossing in 2 days with as many deputies as he can muster. Tell him we'll have proof of slavery, murder, and conspiracy. Tell him... Wyatt paused, then committed to it fully. Tell him Wyatt Hale is calling in his marker from Antietam. Talon's eyebrows rose. Ward had been at Antietam. That changed things. And us, Rina asked. We rest today. Tonight I teach you to crack a safe quiet. Tomorrow night we return what Kane stole, starting with dignity and ending with justice. The shack appeared just as the sun cleared the mountains, rough-hewn logs chinked with mud, barely big enough for 2 people, but positioned perfect with views of every approach. Wyatt got Rina inside, the fever raging, now her skin burning hot. Rest, he said. I'll keep watch. Wyatt, she caught his sleeve. At the cabin, the brand pattern. You recognize something. He was quiet for a long moment. Kane's regiment. They were at Juniper Hollow. Her breath caught. The massacre. 23 families. You know about it. Everyone knows. It's why the territory newspapers call you. She stopped. The ghost of Juniper Hollow. Yeah, I know what they call me. The Union scout who arrived too late found nothing but ashes and bones. That's not what they say. What do they say? They say you hunted down every man involved. That you... I didn't. The words came out flat. I reported it, filed paperwork, waited for justice that never came. Then I walked away, came here, built a cabin, and tried to forget. She was quiet for a moment, studying him with those fever-bright eyes. But you didn't forget. No. Neither did I. Something in her tone made him look at her sharp. I was there, she whispered, at Juniper Hollow. I was 13, hiding in the root cellar when they came. I heard everything, the screams, the flames, the laughter, heard Kane giving orders, calling out positions like it was a training exercise. The world seemed to tilt. Wyatt stared at her pieces falling into place. My mother pushed me into that cellar, Rina continued, told me to stay quiet no matter what I heard. I did. I stayed silent while she burned, while they all burned. I survived because I was a coward. You were a child. I was a witness. And I've spent 12 years looking for proof for justice, for something that would make their deaths mean something. That's how I ended up in that judge's house. That's how I found out about Raven Rock. Her hand found the ledger fragment. This isn't just evidence, Wyatt. This is 12 years of ghosts demanding their due. Outside, a hawk cried. The morning sun painted the mountains gold, but in the shack, shadows held sway. I looked for survivors, Wyatt said quietly. Spent 3 days digging through ash and ruins. If I'd looked harder, you'd have found a 13-year-old girl who couldn't speak for 6 months after, who would have been no use as a witness. You couldn't have saved me then. She met his eyes. But you can help me save them now. The 187. A branch cracked outside. Wyatt was at the window, instantly rifle ready, but it was just an elk, massive and unconcerned, browsing through the clearing. Kane destroyed us both at Juniper Hollow, Rina said. Maybe that means we're the only ones who can stop him. Wyatt watched the elk move on, thought about patterns, about chances, about the weight of untaken shots. Sleep now. Tonight I teach you to crack a safe. Tomorrow we go to war, she finished. No, he corrected. Tomorrow we go to law. War's what made men like Kane. Law's what'll unmake them. But even as he said it, watching the sun climb higher while somewhere below them, Boone's men searched his empty cabin, Wyatt knew the distinction might not hold. Men like Kane didn't recognize law unless it came armed. The day passed in fever dreams and preparation. Wyatt found an old strongbox in the shack's corner, its lock similar enough to practice on. He watched Rina's fingers work clumsy at first with fever and exhaustion, then gradually finding the rhythm. Feel for the tumblers, he instructed. Each one has a sweet spot where it wants to rest. Like finding the truth, she murmured, and he wondered if the fever was talking or something deeper. As the sun reached its zenith, Talon appeared like smoke from the rocks. Boone's men are crawling all over your cabin. They know you headed into high country, but not which direction. You riding out, within the hour, Ward will be at Verde Creek, I promise you that. Armed, if I tell him what I know, he'll bring a small army. Talon studied them both. You sure about this? There are other ways. My people have offers. No, Wyatt cut him off. This ends legal, or it doesn't end. Kane's got connections all the way to Washington. Only way to beat him is make it too public to bury. Talon nodded slow. The tunnel from the old silver mine. It comes up behind Kane's supply shed. Been collapsed for years, but the first 50 feet are clear. After that, he shrugged, maybe passable for those determined enough. You've been inside once, mapping. The safe's in Kane's study behind a painting of Gettysburg. He keeps 3 guards on the house at night, but tomorrow with the loading. He pulled a rough map from his pocket, sketched in charcoal on the deer hide. Guard positions, patrol timing. They're soldiers, still creatures of habit. Wyatt studied it, memorizing. We'll need a diversion if things go bad. My people will be watching. You light a fire on the East Ridge, we'll give you something to run toward. After Talon left, Rina's fever broke. She woke clear-eyed as sunset painted the mountains red, looking stronger but somehow more fragile, like someone who'd passed through flame and come out refined. I remembered something, she said. In the ledger there are transport records, routes, contacts, buyers. If we get that, we don't just free Raven Rock, we unravel the whole network. One thing at a time. No! Her voice carried new steel. We do this complete or Kane just starts over somewhere else. Now she was right, and they both knew it. Men like Kane were like a disease. You had to burn out every trace, or they'd spread again. That night they drilled. Hand signals, timing, contingencies. Wyatt watched her work the practice lock again and again until her fingers moved without thinking. You're military trained, she observed. Was. Officer, captain, scouts and irregulars. Is that how you know Ward? We served together before the war. He went lawman, I went soldier. Both of us trying to impose order on chaos, just different kinds. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think it's possible real justice, or are we just telling ourselves stories? Wyatt thought about 12 years of ghosts, about brands on human skin, about the laughter of men burning families alive. I think sometimes the story we tell ourselves is the only truth we get. But sometimes that's enough. The second dawn came blood-red through smoke. Somewhere in the valley a fire burned, maybe natural, maybe not. Wyatt and Rina made their way down from the high country as shadows lengthened toward another night. The entrance to the old mine tunnel was exactly where Talon had described a black mouth in the hillside, half hidden by fallen rocks and thorny scrub. They'd watched Kane's compound for an hour, counting guards, timing patrols. The loading had begun, men moving crates and human cargo, both the scene chaotic enough to provide cover. Ready? Wyatt asked. Rina touched the hidden pocket where the ledger fragment rested. 12 years ready. They entered the tunnel. The darkness was absolute after the first turn. Wyatt lit a small lantern, kept it shuttered to just a sliver of light. The tunnel walls pressed close, sweating moisture that made every surface slick. 50 feet in, they hit the collapse Talon had mentioned, a wall of fallen stone that looked impassable. But Rina found it first, a gap near the ceiling, just wide enough for a body to squeeze through. They had to abandon the lantern, working by touch, alone, pressing through spaces that seemed too small for human passage. Wyatt had been in tight spots before, but this was different. This was the earth itself trying to swallow them. Beside him, he could hear Rina's controlled breathing, the occasional suppressed gasp, when rocks scraped her wounded shoulder. Then, just when the weight of mountain seemed ready to crush all hope, they emerged into cleaner air. The tunnel continued, and ahead, the faintest suggestion of light. They came up through rotted boards into a supply shed that reeked of leather and gun oil. Through gaps in the plank walls, Wyatt could see the main house, a 2-story structure built like a fortress, all thick adobe and small windows. "Patrol," Rina whispered. They pressed flat as boots passed within feet of the shed. The guard was smoking, relaxed, watching the chaos of loading rather than the shadows. When he passed, they moved. Across the yard, up against the house's rear wall, finding the servants' entrance Talon had marked. The door was locked, but Rina had it open in seconds, those practiced fingers steady now despite everything. Inside, the house felt like a tomb decorated for the living. Confederate memorabilia covered every wall, flags, swords, photographs of proud men in gray uniforms. Kane's shrine to a cause that should have died at Appomattox. They found the study on the second floor. The painting of Gettysburg was massive oils depicting Pickett's charge in all its doomed glory. Behind it, the safe waited, black iron, modern, expensive. "Keep watch," Rina whispered, kneeling before it. Wyatt positioned himself by the door, pistol drawn. Outside, he could hear voices, laughter, the sound of chains. His jaw clenched. "Brl," Rina breathed, working the dial. 18. Click. 1832. For a moment, nothing. Then the final tumbler fell. Inside were ledgers, correspondence, and something else, photographs. Images that turned Wyatt's stomach. Not just the branded workers, but worse. Children. Records of sales, of purchases of humans, traded like cattle. "My God," Rina breathed. "It's worse than—" Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, purposeful. Wyatt grabbed the ledgers, shoved them into the canvas bag they'd brought. Rina took the photographs, the correspondence. No time for careful sorting. The footsteps stopped outside the door. "Someone's been in the safe," a voice said. Boone. Had to be. Wyatt recognized the cruel confidence from reputation alone. The door handle turned. Wyatt shot through the door, heard a curse, and stumble. "Window!" he barked. But Rina was already moving chair through glass, not caring about noise anymore. They'd prepared for this rope pre-tied to the heaviest desk. "Go!" Wyatt fired again as the door burst open. Rina went out the window as Wyatt laid down cover fire. Boone dove aside, bellowing for guards. Wyatt followed Rina rope, burning his palms, hitting the ground hard. A rifle cracked. Dirt exploded beside Wyatt's boot. They ran zigzagging through the compound as shouts erupted everywhere. "The tunnel!" Rina gasped, but men were flooding from that direction. They'd found the entrance. Wyatt grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the east ridge instead. If Talon's people were watching, fire erupted from the western buildings. Not small fires, massive flames that lit the night like day. The Apache had delivered their diversion early and with prejudice. Guards ran toward the flames, leaving gaps in their perimeter. Wyatt and Rina pushed through up into the rocks, climbing as bullets whined off stone around them. "There," Rina pointed, "horses." Talon himself holding the reins, his face painted for war. They mounted as riders appeared below. Kane himself at their head, that gray beard wild in the firelight, face twisted with rage. "Ride for Verde Creek," Talon shouted. "Ward's already there." They rode like the devil's own hounds were after them, which wasn't far from truth. Through narrow canyons and across moonlit mesas, the sound of pursuit never far behind. Wyatt's horse stumbled. He kept it upright through will alone, Rina beside him, those stolen ledgers bouncing in their saddlebags, evidence that would either save 187 souls or get them all killed trying. Dawn was breaking as they crested the ridge above Verde Creek. Below, Marshal Ethan Ward waited with 8 deputies, all armed, all wearing the silver star of federal authority. But Kane was right behind them, 20 men at his back, and Wyatt could see the moment of decision in Ward's weathered face: enforce the law or avoid a massacre. Then Rina held up the ledger's pages, fluttering in the morning wind, and her voice carried clear, "Marshal Ward, I have evidence of slavery, murder, and trafficking by Colonel Kane, 187 souls held in bondage. Will the law stand or will it kneel?" And in that moment, as Kane's men pulled up short, as Ward's deputies drew their weapons, as the sun painted the valley gold with possibility, Wyatt Hale understood that some fights you don't walk away from, some fights you finish. Ward's deputies spread out in a practiced line, their rifles catching the morning sun like a fence of steel. The marshal himself sat his horse steady as stone, those gray eyes moving between Kane's riders and the evidence in Rina's hands. The moment stretched taut as wet leather in the sun. "Colonel Kane," Ward's voice carried the weight of law across the creek. "I'm placing you under arrest for suspicion of human trafficking, forced labor, and murder." Kane laughed, harsh and bitter as alkali water. "On the word of a thief and a deserter, Marshal, you're reaching beyond your grasp." "The evidence will speak for itself," Ward replied, but Wyatt caught the slight shift in his saddle, the way his hand moved closer to his sidearm. 8 deputies against 20 riders, the math was clear to everyone. Then Rina did something that changed everything. She opened one of the ledgers, her voice carrying clear as a church bell. Marcus Thompson, age 32, purchased from Yuma Prison, died in cave-in June 3rd. Sarah Martinez, age 19, branded and sold to the Copper Crown Mine, presumed dead. James Crawford, age 14. "Shut your mouth, woman," Kane roared, spurring his horse forward. Ward's rifle was in his hands before Kane moved 3 feet. "Another step, and I drop you where you sit." The riders behind Kane bristled, hands moving to weapons. The deputies matched them, hammers clicking back in a deadly chorus. The creek between them might as well have been an ocean of blood waiting to be filled. "You have no jurisdiction here," Kane said, regaining his composure. "This is territorial land, not federal." "Human trafficking crosses state lines," Ward countered. "That makes it federal, and that star I'm wearing says I've got all the jurisdiction I need." Wyatt watched Kane's face, saw the calculation there. The colonel was weighing odds, considering whether a bloodbath would serve his purposes. Kill a federal marshal and his deputies, claim self-defense, use his connections to make it stick. It might work. But then something unexpected happened. One of Kane's own riders, a younger man with haunted eyes, slowly raised his hands. "I'm out, Colonel. This ain't what I signed on for." "You yellow bastard," Kane started. "My brother's in that mine," the rider said quietly. "Been there 2 years since you claimed he stole from the company store. I helped put him there, God forgive me." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Another rider shifted uncomfortably, then another. The solid wall of Kane's force began to show cracks. Talon, who'd been silent until now, spoke from beside Wyatt. "The Apache Nation has witnessed these crimes. Our testimony will be heard in any court." "Indian testimony ain't worth spit," one of Kane's men spat. "It is in federal court," Ward said. "Times are changing, boys. Question is whether you change with them or get buried by them." Kane's horse danced nervously, sensing its rider's rage. "You think you've won something here? You have no idea the connections I have. The men who owe me favors. I'll be out before sunset, and then—" His threat was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. Lots of them. From the east came a dust cloud that resolved into more riders, 15, maybe 20, but these weren't more of Kane's men. They were townsfolk from Iron Mesa miners, from legitimate operations ranchers, even a few Apache warriors. Word had spread somehow. The standoff at Verda Creek had drawn an audience, and that audience had chosen a side. "Seems the territory's tired of your particular brand of justice, Colonel," Ward observed. Kane's eyes darted around, taking in the new arrivals. Some of his men were already backing their horses away, creating distance between themselves and their employer. The mathematics of violence had shifted dramatically. "Marshal Ward," Rina called out, her voice steady despite everything. "I formally request protection as a witness to federal crimes. These ledgers contain evidence of 187 people currently held in forced labor at the Raven Rock mine." Ward nodded slowly. "Protection granted, Colonel Kane. I'm going to ask you once to surrender peacefully." For a moment, Wyatt thought Kane might actually draw. The man's hand twitched toward his sidearm, that Confederate pride warring with practical survival. Then, with visible effort, Kane raised his hands. "Silas," he called to his foreman, "tell the men to stand down." But Boone wasn't looking at Kane. He was staring at Rina, at the scars visible on her neck, above her collar, at the evidence of his own handiwork. "She's property," he said, voice thick with something uglier than rage. "Branded and bought, she belongs—" Wyatt's gun was out and aimed before Boone could finish the sentence. "Try it, please." The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Boone's hand hovered near his pistol. Wyatt's finger rested on the trigger, and between them stretched 12 years of ghosts demanding justice. "Silas," Kane's voice cracked like a whip. "Stand down." Slowly, with murder in his eyes, Boone raised his hands. Ward gestured to his deputies. "Take them, all of them." As the deputies moved in, Kane locked eyes with Wyatt. "I remember you now. The ghost soldier who came sniffing around Juniper Hollow. You never could leave well enough alone." "Juniper Hollow wasn't well enough," Wyatt replied quietly. "It was murder. It was war. War ended at Appomattox. What you did after was just evil wearing a uniform." Kane's smile was cold as winter morning. "You think this ends here? You think saving a few workers changes anything? There are dozens of operations like mine, hundreds of men like me. The South will rise again, boy, just not the way you think." "Maybe," Wyatt said, "but not today, and not through you." The deputies secured Kane and his men with shackles. The sound of iron closing on iron, a peculiar form of justice. Some of the riders who'd abandoned Kane offered to help escort the prisoners to Prescott. The federal jail there had cells enough for all of them. But Ward held up a hand. "This isn't over. We need to get to Raven Rock before word spreads. If there's really 187 people there—" "There are," Rina said firmly. "I counted them every night for 3 months. Memorized their faces, their names when I could learn them." Then we ride now, Ward decided, before Kane's remaining men can move them, or worse. The ride to Raven Rock was tense despite their numbers. The compound appeared as the sun reached its zenith, a collection of buildings around a gaping mine entrance, all surrounded by a wooden palisade that looked more like a military fort than a mining operation. The gates were closed guards visible on the walls. Ward rode forward alone, badge held high. Federal marshals opened these gates in the name of the law. For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice from inside. Colonel Kane's orders were clear. Nobody gets in or out. Colonel Kane is under arrest, Ward shouted back. You can open these gates, or we can open them for you. Your choice. Wyatt watched the guards conferring. Without Kane or Boone, they were sheep without shepherds. Finally, the gates creaked open. What they found inside defied easy description. The workers were housed in conditions that made army stockades look luxurious, cramped barracks with barely room to lie down. Chains and shackles hung from posts where discipline was administered. The smell alone told stories of suffering, but it was the workers themselves that hit hardest. Hollow-eyed, skeletal, many bearing the same brand pattern Wyatt had seen on Rina's shoulder. They cowered as the riders entered, too beaten down to even hope for rescue. My God, one of Ward's deputies whispered. Rina dismounted, walked slowly toward the nearest group of workers. It's over, she said softly. You're free. An older woman, her face a map of premature aging, looked up with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. They said that before, when the territory inspectors came. Soon as they left. They're not leaving, Rina said firmly. And neither are you. Not in chains, anyway. It took hours to process the scene, to document the evidence, to tend to the worst of the wounded. Talon's people arrived with medical supplies, food, water. The Apache had apparently been preparing for this possibility, watching and waiting for their chance to help. Wyatt found himself in the mine's administrative office, going through papers with Ward. Every document told a story of calculated cruelty of humans reduced to numbers on a ledger. This goes all the way to Washington, Ward said quietly. There are senators' names here, Wyatt. Judges. This is bigger than just Kane. Then we make it public, Wyatt replied. Every newspaper in the territory. Hell, send it to New York if we have to. Make it too big to bury. Ward studied him. When did you become an idealist? I'm not. I'm just tired of men like Kane winning. A commotion outside drew their attention. One of the workers, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, had collapsed. As Rina tended to him, he grabbed her hand. The children, he gasped. He moved the children yesterday, said they were going to a special buyer in Mexico. Rina's face went white. How many? 8, maybe 10. The youngest was probably 7. Wyatt felt that cold rage returning, the kind that had once driven him to hunt Confederate raiders through 3 states. Which way? South Road, but they've got a day's head start. Wyatt was already moving Rina beside him. Ward called after them. You can't just watch me, Wyatt shot back. Talon appeared with fresh horses already saddled. My scouts tracked them to Skeleton Canyon. They're moving slow with wagons. How many guards? 6, plus the driver and someone in a fancy suit, the buyer probably. Wyatt checked his weapons, the motion automatic after so many years. We'll need to move fast, hit them before they reach the border. I'm coming, Rina said. No, you're injured, fevered. Those children are there because I waited too long to act. I'm coming. The determination in her eyes brooked no argument. Ward assigned 2 deputies to accompany them, and they rode out as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. They caught up to the wagons just as shadows grew long across the canyon floor. From a ridge above, Wyatt studied the situation through his field glasses. 2 wagons, heavy built with iron bars on the windows. Prison wagons, the kind used to transport condemned men. Children in cages, one of the deputies muttered. What kind of man? The kind we're about to stop. Wyatt cut him off. They planned it quick and simple. Talon would take position on the far ridge. The deputies would block the road ahead. and Wyatt and Rina would come from behind. No time for elaborate strategies. The attack began with Talon's rifle shot taking out the lead wagon's wheel. The wagon lurched, tilted, stuck. Guards scattered for cover as the deputies opened fire from ahead. Wyatt came down the slope like an avalanche, Rina behind him. A guard turned, raised his rifle. Wyatt shot him through the shoulder, spinning him down. Another tried to use the wagon for cover, but Rina was there, her pistol steady despite her injured shoulder. "Drop them," she commanded. The remaining guards, caught in crossfire, threw down their weapons. The man in the fancy suit, a soft-bodied specimen with gold teeth, tried to run. Talon's warning shot kicked up dust at his feet, and he fell to his knees, blubbering about diplomatic immunity. Wyatt ignored him, went straight to the wagons. Inside, children huddled together, some crying, others too traumatized to make a sound. The youngest was indeed about 7, a girl with huge dark eyes and skin bearing fresh brands. "It's okay," Wyatt said softly, his voice gentling in a way it hadn't in years. "We're here to take you home." "Don't have no home," a boy answered, maybe 10 years old. "They burned it." The keys were on the dead guard's belt. Wyatt unlocked the cages, helped the children out one by one. Some could barely walk. All bore signs of abuse that would have broken lesser spirits. Rina wrapped the youngest girl in her own coat, tears streaming down her face. "We're going to make this right," she promised. "Can't make it right," the same boy said, old beyond his years. "Dead's dead. Burn's burned." Wyatt knelt before him, met those ancient child's eyes. "You're right. Can't undo what's done, but we can make sure it stops here. Make sure no other kids go through what you did. That's something, isn't it?" The boy studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They made camp there in the canyon, not trusting the traumatized children to travel in darkness. The deputies secured the prisoners while Talon's people, who seemed to materialize from the rocks, like spirits, brought blankets and food. That night, around a carefully tended fire, Rina told the children stories. Not fairy tales, but real stories of people who'd survived terrible things and found lives worth living after. Wyatt watched her work her magic, saw how the children slowly gravitated toward her warmth. "You're good with them," he observed quietly when she took a break. "I was them," she replied simply. "Hidden in a cellar while the world burned above. The only difference is, I had 13 years before it happened. They've known nothing but horror." One of the deputies, a younger man named Collins, approached. "Mr. Hale, that fancy suit is asking to make a deal. Says he has information about the whole network, names and places, if we guarantee him protection." Wyatt looked at this man, now stripped of his dignity, and gold teeth. Talon had removed them for evidence, shivering in his silk shirt. "Tell him he can make his deal with Marshal Ward, after he explains to a judge why he was buying children." Dawn came gray and cold. They loaded the children into the wagons, now converted to rescue vehicles rather than prisons, and began the journey back to Iron Mesa. The fancy suit and surviving guards walked shackled together, deputies watching them with disgust. They were perhaps 5 miles from town when riders appeared on the horizon. Wyatt's hand went to his gun, but then he recognized the lead figure, Ward himself, with what looked like half the town behind him. "Thought you might need help," the marshal called out. "Got it handled," Wyatt replied, but there was warmth in it. The townsfolk had brought more than help. They'd brought clothes for the children, food, medical supplies. The doctor's wife had turned the church into a temporary hospital. Families were already volunteering to take in orphans. It was Wyatt realized what community was supposed to look like. As they reached the town proper, crowds lined the streets. Word had spread about Raven Rock, about the rescue, about the children. Some folks were crying, others stood silent, bearing witness. Kane and his men were already locked up, awaiting transport to federal prison. The fancy suit would join them after he sang his song to prosecutors. The ledgers had been copied and sent to newspapers across the territory and beyond, but there was still work to do. That evening in the marshal's office, Ward laid out the situation. Kane's operation is finished, but like he said, there are others. These ledgers give us leads to maybe a dozen similar setups. Then we go after them, Rina said immediately. Ward raised an eyebrow. I've been tracking this network for 12 years. I know things that aren't in those ledgers. Give me a badge, temporary or otherwise, and I'll help you tear it all down. Ward looked at Wyatt. What about you? I could use a man with your skills. Wyatt thought about his cabin, about the solitude he'd sought for so long. Then he looked at Rina, at the steel in her spine and the fire in her eyes, at the children visible through the window slowly learning to play again. I spent 12 years trying to forget Juniper Hollow, he said slowly. Maybe it's time I tried remembering it right, by making sure it never happens again. Ward smiled, pulled 2 badges from his desk. Temporary deputy marshals. The pay's terrible and people shoot at you. So no change from my current life, Wyatt observed dryly. As Rina pinned on her badge, her fingers traced the edge where it covered one of her scars. Talon says his people know of 3 more operations within a week's ride. Then we'd better get started, Ward said. But first, there was something else to handle. The next morning, they held a ceremony at Raven Rock. The brands would be documented as evidence, but the workers were offered the chance to have them medically treated, covered, modified into something else. Some took the offer, others kept them as reminders. The mine itself was a different question. By territorial law, it remained Kane's property until trial and conviction. Burn it, suggested someone from the crowd. No, said the old woman who'd first doubted their freedom. We worked it, we bled for it. It should be ours. Ward nodded slowly. I'll talk to the federal prosecutor. Reparations are rare, but not unprecedented. As the crowd dispersed, planning their potential future, Wyatt found himself standing with Rina at the spot where they'd first entered the compound. The gates that had once locked people in now stood open, probably forever. You saved me, Rina said quietly. That first day in the canyon. You saved yourself. I just provided distraction. I mean it. I was ready to die, had been ready since Juniper Hollow. Living was just waiting. But when you didn't flinch at the scars, when you just helped without asking for anything. She trailed off, then continued stronger. You reminded me that not all men are Kane. Most aren't, Wyatt said. They're just quiet about it. It's the Kanes who make all the noise, make us think they're the majority. Then maybe it's time the quiet ones got louder. That afternoon, a telegram arrived that changed everything. The story had reached Washington. The president himself had ordered a full investigation. Federal troops were being dispatched to assist. It's happening, Ward said, almost disbelieving. Real change. But Kane wasn't done. That night, as Wyatt walked Rina back to the boarding house where she was staying, shadows moved in the alley beside them. Wyatt pushed Rina aside as the knife came out of darkness, taking it in his side instead of her heart. The attacker, one of Kane's men who'd escaped the roundup, raised the blade again. Rina's derringer barked twice and he fell. Wyatt slumped against the wall, hand coming away red from his side. Seems Kane had one more card to play. Don't you dare die on me, Rina said, fiercely pressing her hands against the wound. Not when we're just starting. Starting what? Whatever this is. Justice, redemption, maybe something more. He looked up at her, this woman who'd survived hell and come out swinging and managed to smile. Takes more than a knife to kill a ghost. She kissed him, then fierce and desperate and full of life. You're not a ghost, Wyatt Hale. You're the most alive person I know. Now stay that way. The doctor said the blade had missed everything vital, though it had been close. Kane, when informed of the failed assassination attempt, simply smiled from his cell. The South rises in many ways, he said, but his smile faded when Marshal Ward informed him that his would-be assassin had survived and was willing to testify about who'd ordered the hit. Murder for hire on top of everything else, Kane would hang for certain now. 3 days later, as Wyatt recovered, unexpected visitors arrived. 3 women traveling worn but dignified, asking for Rina Clarke. "We heard what you did," the eldest said. "We're from Willow Creek. Our men and boys taken 6 months ago told they were going to railroad work. You think they're in a place like Raven Rock," Rina finished. "Will you help us?" Rina looked at Wyatt, who nodded despite the pain and gas on his side. "We'll help. All of us will." And so it began, not an ending, but a transformation. The ghost of Juniper Hollow became something else, something more. Not a spirit of vengeance, but an agent of justice. And Rina Clarke, the girl who'd hidden in a root cellar, became the woman who brought down an empire built on human misery. The work would be long, dangerous, filled with setbacks. There would be more Kanes, more Boones, more men who saw others as property, but there would also be more people willing to stand up, to speak out, to act. That night, as Wyatt stood carefully on the boarding house porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, Rina joined him. "Regret giving up your solitude?" she asked. "Ask me in a year." "I will," she promised. "Every year for as long as you'll let me." In the distance, they could hear children playing, the ones they'd rescued, slowly remembering how to laugh. It wasn't justice, not completely. Justice would have been those children never suffering at all. But it was something. It was a start. The women from Willow Creek had brought more than just their plea for help. They'd brought a map hand-drawn on deer hide showing a compound deep in the Mogollon Rim country. As Wyatt studied it by lamplight, his wound still tender beneath the bandages, he recognized the tactical brilliance of the location, one way in, surrounded by cliffs, virtually impregnable. "This is different from Raven Rock," he said quietly. "This is a fortress." The eldest woman, Mary Sullivan, leaned forward. "My boy, Tommy, he got one letter out. Said they're mining silver, but the ore ran out months ago. Now they're just digging. Kane's people are moving operations there." Ward cursed under his breath. "We arrested Kane 3 days ago. How?" "His network doesn't stop with him," Rina said, tracing the map with one finger. "I recognize this. It's in the ledgers coded as Site 7. They've been preparing it for months." A knock at the door interrupted them. Collins entered, face grave. "Marshal, we've got a problem. Judge Harriman just arrived from Prescott. He's ordering Kane's release." The room erupted. Ward slammed his fist on the desk. "On what grounds?" "Says the evidence was obtained illegally. No warrant for the safe." Wyatt stood, despite the pain in his side. "That's impossible. We had probable cause." "Harriman's in Kane's pocket," Rina said flatly. "His name's in the ledgers, too. Page 47, third column. Received 8,000 in gold over 2 years. Ward strapped on his gun belt. "Then we arrest Harriman, too." "With what authority?" Collins asked nervously. "He's a federal judge." "With the authority of evidence and justice," Ward replied. "Collins, wire the federal prosecutor in Santa Fe. Tell him we need help yesterday." But when they reached the jail, they were too late. Harriman stood outside Kane's empty cell, a smug smile creasing his fat face. "The prisoner has been released on his own recognizance pending trial." "Where is he?" Ward demanded. "That's no longer your concern, Marshal. You're relieved of duty pending investigation into your illegal search methods." Ward laughed, harsh and bitter. "You don't have that authority." Harriman produced a document. "Telegraph from Washington. Seems Colonel Kane has friends in high places." Wyatt read it over Ward's shoulder. It looked official, but something was off about the seal. "This is forged." "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Hale." "Not as serious as aiding human trafficking." Rina stepped forward. "Judge Harriman, I have documents proving you received payments from Kane's operation. Would you like to see them?" The judge's face purpled. "You little—" His words were cut off by the sound of galloping horses. Through the window, they could see Kane riding hard with Boone and 6 other men heading south toward the Mogollon Rim. "He's going to Site 7, Wyatt said. "He'll destroy evidence, move the workers." "Or kill them," Mary Sullivan said quietly. like they did at Blue River when the Federals got close. Ward made his decision. Collins, arrest Judge Harriman. You can't. I can and I am. Conspiracy to commit human trafficking. Ward turned to the others. We ride in 1 hour. Bring everyone, deputies, townspeople, anyone willing to fight. That's vigilante justice, Harriman sputtered. No, Wyatt said coldly. Vigilante justice would be hanging you from the nearest tree. This is a citizen's arrest with federal authority pending arrival of legitimate judicial review. As Collins led Harriman to a cell, Talon appeared in the doorway. My scouts report Kane's got 20 men at Site 7, maybe more coming. Then we'd better have more than that, Ward said. The hour that followed saw Iron Mesa transform into something from the war men checking weapons, women preparing medical supplies, horses being saddled. The rescued workers from Raven Rock, those strong enough, volunteered to join them. You don't have to do this, Wyatt told them. The old woman from the first day spoke for them all. Yes, we do. There are others suffering what we suffered. We know what's waiting for them if Kane wins. They rode out as storm clouds gathered over the mountains. 43 souls united by purpose, if not background. Apache scouts, Mexican vaqueros, former slaves, Irish miners, even a Chinese doctor who'd lost his brother to Kane's operation. Rina rode beside Wyatt, her badge catching lightning flashes. You know this could go bad. Already has. We're just trying to make it go right. She smiled at that fierce and beautiful. Wyatt Hale, the optimist, realist. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. They made camp at dusk, still 10 miles from Site 7. Talon's scouts reported increased activity at the compound, wagons being loaded, workers being gathered. Kane was definitely planning something. That night, as rain began to fall, one of the scouts brought disturbing news. Soldiers, he said. Confederate Gray, maybe 15, riding hard from Texas. Ward cursed. Kane called in his old unit. Not officially disbanded then, Wyatt said grimly. Still fighting their lost war. Changes the odds considerably, Ward admitted. No, Rina said firmly. It clarifies them. This isn't about law anymore. It's about two visions of America, one where people own people and one where they don't. Thunder crashed overhead, as if in agreement. In the sudden illumination, Wyatt saw faces around the fire, determined, scared, angry, resolved. These weren't soldiers. They were ordinary people pushed to extraordinary action. I need to tell you all something, Wyatt said, standing despite his wound. Tomorrow won't be easy. Some of us might not ride back. If anyone wants to leave, now's the time. No shame in it. Nobody moved. Mary Sullivan stood. Mr. Hale, my boy's in that compound. I'd ride into hell itself to get him back. Others voiced agreement. The old woman from Raven Rock raised her gnarled fist. We've been in hell. Time to return the favor. The attack began at dawn, rain still falling in sheets. They split into 3 groups, Ward leading a frontal distraction, Talon's Apache taking the heights, and Wyatt leading a strike team through a narrow canyon that the scouts had found. The first shot came from the compound, a sentry spotting Ward's approach. Then all hell broke loose. Rifles cracked from both sides, the rain turning dust to mud, making footing treacherous. Wyatt's team pushed through the canyon, Rina beside him, Collins, and 3 miners behind. They could hear the main battle raging, drawing defenders away from their route. They emerged behind the compound's stable. Through the rain, Wyatt could see the workers, dozens of them, being herded into a mine entrance by armed guards. Kane was going to seal them in, claim a cave-in, destroy the evidence. We need to move now, Rina hissed. They charged across open ground. A guard turned, raised his rifle. Wyatt shot him down. Another appeared in a doorway. Collins got him. They pushed forward, rain and gun smoke creating a hellish mix. Inside the mine entrance, Kane stood with Boone and 5 men, the workers cowering before them. Kane held a bundle of dynamite fuse already lit. "Stop right there, Hale," Kane shouted. "Another step, and I blow the entrance. Seal them all in." Wyatt froze, calculating distances, angles, odds. The fuse was burning fast. "You do that, you die too," Wyatt said. "Maybe, but my cause lives on." Kane's eyes were wild, fanatic. "The South will rise, if not in my lifetime, then in my legacy." Behind Kane, among the workers, a boy about 15 caught Wyatt's eye. Tommy Sullivan had to be. The boy's hand moved slightly. He had a rock, was gauging the distance to Kane. Wyatt needed to buy time. "Your cause is dead, Kane. Your Confederate friends, Talon's men, are cutting them apart in the heights. Your compound overrun. You're the last of a failed rebellion." "Liar." The boy moved. The rock flew true, striking Kane's wrist. The dynamite bundle fell, fuse still burning. Boone dove for it. Rina shot him mid-leap. The dynamite rolled toward the workers. Wyatt ran, ignoring his wound, ignoring everything but that burning fuse. He grabbed the bundle, yanked the fuse free with inches to spare. The mine entrance went silent except for the rain outside. Kane pulled his pistol. Wyatt, hands full of dynamite, could only watch. Then Tommy Sullivan hit Kane with a shovel, a ringing blow that dropped the colonel like a sack of grain. "That's for 2 years of hell," the boy said quietly. The remaining guards surrendered. Outside, the battle was winding down. Ward's frontal assault, combined with Talon's elevation advantage, had broken the defenders. The Confederate reinforcements had been caught in a box canyon by the Apache, most surrendering when they realized the trap. They found the compound's records in Kane's office, more detailed than even Raven Rock's. Names, dates, transactions, and something worse, plans for expansion into California, Oregon, even Canada. Kane hadn't been building a business. He'd been building an empire of misery. "Look at this," Rina said, holding up a letter. "It's from someone called the General, authorizing Kane's operations, promising protection." Ward read it, face darkening. "This goes higher than we thought." "Then we go higher too," Wyatt said. The liberation of Site 7 took the rest of the day. 43 workers freed, some who'd been there for 3 years. Medical attention, food, water, and most importantly, hope. Tommy Sullivan's reunion with his mother broke something in Wyatt, a wall he'd built after Juniper Hollow. Watching them embrace, both crying, he understood that some things could be healed, even if they couldn't be undone. "You did this," Rina said softly beside him. "We did this." "No, I mean, you chose to act. That first day in the canyon, you could have kept walking, every step, since you could have turned back." "So could you," she smiled. "I didn't have a choice. This has been my purpose since I was 13. But you chose to care again. That's harder." That evening, as they prepared to transport prisoners and freed workers back to Iron Mesa, a rider approached under a white flag. He carried a message from the mysterious general. "Terms," the messenger said simply. "The general proposes a trade. You stop your investigation, he stops the operations. Everyone walks away." Ward spat. "Tell your general he can surrender or be hunted down. Those are the only terms." The messenger smiled coldly. "The general thought you might say that. He wanted me to give you this." He handed over a tintype photograph. It showed a young woman, maybe 20, bound and gagged. Rina gasped. She recognized her. Sarah Martinez, from the ledgers. She was supposed to be dead. "The general keeps special merchandise for leverage," the messenger said. "You have 48 hours to accept terms, or she and 12 others like her disappear forever." After the messenger left, the group gathered to discuss. The smart move was to accept, take the partial victory, save who they could. "But he'll just start again somewhere else," Mary Sullivan said. "Men like that don't stop. They just relocate." "Then we don't stop either," Wyatt said. "We find this general, we find the 13 hostages, and we end this properly." That's suicide, Collins said. We don't even know where they are. Rina was studying the photograph intently. Yes, we do. Look at the wallpaper behind her. That pattern, it's from the Majestic Hotel in Tucson. High-end place, caters to wealthy clientele. You're sure? I cleaned rooms there before I went to Prescott. That's the third-floor pattern, the luxury suites. Ward stood. Then we've got 48 hours to plan an assault on a hotel full of civilians and save 13 hostages from a man we've never seen. Actually, Talon said quietly, I've seen him. The general, he's Brigadier General Marcus Wade, officially retired, unofficially, running half the illegal operations in the territory. He owns the Majestic through shell companies. How do you know this? My people have been tracking him for 5 years. He's the one who sold rifles to the faction that massacred my cousin's village. The room went quiet. This wasn't just about freed workers anymore. This was about dismantling an entire shadow empire. We'll need help, Ward said finally. Federal troops, proper authority. Won't get here in time, Wyatt interrupted. 48 hours, remember. Then what do you propose? Wyatt looked around the room at faces that had become familiar, trusted, even loved. We do what we've been doing. We act. We trust each other. We save who we can. And the general, we give him what Kane got, justice, legal and proper. But if he resists, Wyatt touched his holstered Colt, then we give him what he's given others. The storm had passed, leaving the night crystal clear. Stars wheeled overhead like witnesses to their pledge. Tomorrow they would ride for Tucson, 43 souls against an empire. But tonight, in this moment, they were something more than their individual selves. They were proof that ordinary people could stand against extraordinary evil. Rina found Wyatt standing watch, looking south toward Tucson. You know this is probably suicide. Probably. And you're going anyway. Yes. She stood beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. Why? He thought about it, about Juniper Hollow, about 12 years of trying to forget about scarred shoulders and branded souls. Because someone has to. Because we can. Because if we don't, then Kane would even from a cell. That's not the only reason. He looked at her, this remarkable woman who'd survived hell and chosen to fight rather than hide. No, it's not. She kissed him then, soft and certain. Whatever happens in Tucson, we'll face it together, he finished. Behind them, the camp settled into sleep. Tomorrow would bring the final battle, but tonight, under an infinite sky, hope felt possible. Justice felt achievable. And redemption, that most elusive of gifts, felt within reach. The sound of a harmonica drifted through the night, one of the freed workers playing an old hymn. Others joined in singing softly, voices mixing in harmony that transcended race culture history. Wyatt had started this journey tracking a deer through highland pines. Now he stood with an army of the righteous, preparing to tear down an empire built on human suffering. The transformation shouldn't have been possible, but then again, neither should Kane's evil. Sometimes the impossible was just what hadn't been tried yet. Tomorrow, Rina said quietly. Tomorrow, he agreed. And in that word lay both promise and threat, both ending and beginning, both justice and whatever came after justice was done. The ride to Tucson took 18 hours of hard travel. Their group now swelled to 50 with new volunteers from Iron Mesa. They stopped only to water horses and for Wyatt to have his wound checked by the Chinese Dr. Li Wei, who'd insisted on coming despite being 60 years old. You're bleeding through the bandages again, Li Wei said quietly as he worked. This kind of riding could kill you. So could leaving 13 people to die, Wyatt replied. The doctor met his eyes. My brother thought the same. Rode wounded to save others from Kane's mine. He died a hero, but he died. The living need you alive, Mr. Hale. 5 miles from Tucson, Talon's scouts returned with troubling news. The Majestic Hotel was hosting a gathering wealthy cattlemen politicians, even a senator from back east. Over 100 guests plus staff. The general's using them as shields, Ward said grimly. We can't assault a hotel full of civilians. Then we don't assault it, Rina said, studying the hotel through field glasses. We infiltrate it. She turned to face them, a plan already forming in those dark eyes. The Majestic needs staff for an event this size. Temporary workers, especially ones who know the hotel. I could get inside. Absolutely not, Wyatt said immediately. You're known to them now. Kane's people would recognize you. Not if I'm just another servant. People like the General don't look at the help, Wyatt. We're invisible to them. Mary Sullivan spoke up. I worked kitchens for 20 years before marrying. I could go with her. And me, said Maria Santos, one of the freed workers from Site 7. I served in fine houses before Kane took me. Ward shook his head. This is insane. We're talking about walking into... A rider approaching under a white flag interrupted him. Not the same messenger as before, this one wore the uniform of a Union Army major. As he got closer, Ward cursed. Major Harrison, he's assigned to the territorial governor. Harrison stopped just outside rifle range, his voice carrying clear. Marshal Ward, the governor orders you to stand down. Any action against the Majestic Hotel will be considered an act of rebellion. The governor's in the general's pocket too, Collins whispered. Half the territory is... Ward replied bitterly. Then louder, Major Harrison, we have evidence of human trafficking and murder. We're acting under federal authority. What federal authority? A dismissed marshal and a band of vigilantes. Harrison laughed. General Wade has shown us your so-called evidence. Forgeries and lies from a deranged woman and a deserter. Stand down or face the consequences. He wheeled his horse and rode back toward town. In the distance, they could see Union soldiers taking positions around the hotel. They're protecting him, Tommy Sullivan said in disbelief. The actual army is protecting a slaver. Not the army, Talon corrected. Those aren't regular troops. Look at their insignia, territorial militia, probably half of them on the general's payroll. Wyatt stood slowly, his mind working through possibilities. Then we need to make this too public to cover up. Ward, how many newspaper men do you know in Tucson? 2, maybe 3 who aren't bought. Get them. Tell them there's going to be a story tonight that'll sell papers from here to New York. He turned to Rina. Your plan, can you get us proof the hostages are in the hotel? Give me 2 hours and a servant's dress. I'm going with you. You can barely stand and you're about as subtle as a cavalry charge. I'll take Mary and Maria. She touched his face gently. Trust me. He caught her hand. If something happens, then you'd better come save me, but Wyatt, try not to get shot doing it. I've gotten used to having you around. An hour later, Rina, Mary, and Maria approached the Majestic service entrance dressed as laundresses. Rina had dirtied her face, changed her posture, made herself invisible in the way she'd learned during her years of hiding in plain sight. The head housekeeper, a German woman with a face like pickled cabbage, barely looked at them. You know the 3rd floor? Yes, ma'am, Rina replied, affecting a slight Irish accent. Worked here 2 seasons past. Good. The general's private suites need turning. He's very particular. No noise, no dawdling, no speaking to guests. You see anything unusual, you see nothing. Understood. They nodded meekly and were waved inside with armloads of linens. The hotel was even more opulent than Rina remembered. Crystal chandeliers, Persian rugs, the smell of wealth and corruption mingling like expensive perfume. They made their way to the 3rd floor where 2 guards stood outside a suite. Not hotel security, these were hard men with military bearing and visible weapons. Linens for the general, Rina said, keeping her eyes down. One guard looked them over suspiciously, then opened the door. 5 minutes, don't touch anything but the beds. Inside the suite was empty of people but full of evidence. Maps on the table showing trafficking routes. Ledgers matching Kane's, and in the adjoining room a sound that made Rina's blood run cold, muffled crying. She moved toward it, but Mary caught her arm, nodding toward the window. Through the curtains, Rina could see guards on the balcony. They were never alone. Working quickly, they changed the linens while Maria used a small mirror to look under the connecting door. She held up fingers 4, maybe 5 people in the next room. The crying continued, young and desperate. A voice from the hallway made them freeze. The general himself, his voice cultured but cold. "Have the packages ready for transport by midnight. The buyer doesn't like delays." "Sir," another voice replied, "what about the marshal's people? They're still out there. Let them sit. In 6 hours, those packages will be on their way to Mexico, and Ward's evidence will be meaningless. Dead slaves tell no tales." Footsteps approached. The women grabbed their linens and headed for the door, but it opened before they reached it. General Marcus Wade stood there, tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man used to absolute authority. His eyes swept over them, paused on Rina. "You girl, look at me." Rina raised her head slowly, keeping her expression blank, praying the dirt and changed posture would be enough. The general studied her for a long moment. "Have we met?" "Don't think so, sir. Only started yesterday." He moved closer, and Rina could smell bourbon and cigars on him. "You remind me of someone, a troublemaker who cost me considerable money." Mary stepped forward deliberately, clumsy, spilling water from a pitcher onto the general's boots. "Oh, sir, I'm so sorry. Let me—" "You stupid cow!" The general backhanded Mary, sending her sprawling. Rina's hand moved instinctively toward the knife hidden in her boot, but Maria caught it, squeezing hard in warning. "Get out," the general snarled. "All of you, and send someone competent to clean this mess." They fled, Mary holding her bleeding lip, Rina's whole body shaking with suppressed rage. In the service corridor, they ducked into an empty room. "We need to get word to Wyatt," Rina whispered. "Midnight. They're moving them at midnight." "There's more," Maria said quietly. She pulled out a piece of paper. She'd managed to grab it from the table while the general was distracted. "Look." It was a list of names, not just the 13 hostages, but dozens more with prices beside them. At the bottom, a note, "Phoenix auction, September 15th. "Mother of God," Mary breathed. "He's planning a slave auction, an actual slave auction in 1878. They made their way out through the kitchens, but as they reached the service entrance, guards appeared. "You 3, the general wants to see you again." Rina's blood went cold. He'd figured it out. They were marched back upstairs, where the general waited with several men, including Major Harrison. The general held a wanted poster. Rina's face stared back from it, the reward set at $500. "Miss Clarke," the general said pleasantly, "how nice of you to deliver yourself. Did you really think dirt and address would fool me?" "Let them go," Rina said, indicating Mary and Maria. "They don't know anything." "Oh, I think not. They're witnesses now. Besides, I can always use more inventory." He turned to his men. "Lock them in with the others. We'll move them all at midnight." As guards grabbed them, Rina fought back, managing to bloody one's nose before a rifle butt to her stomach dropped her. Through blurring vision, she saw the general lean down. "Your friend Hale will come for you. When he does, we'll be ready. You're not just inventory, Miss Clarke. You're bait." Outside town, Wyatt paced despite his wound, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Rina and the others had been gone too long. "Something's wrong," he said. Ward nodded. "Question is, do we go in blind or wait for—" Talon appeared from nowhere, as was his way. "They've been taken. My scouts saw them marched back inside under guard." Wyatt was already moving toward his horse when Li Wei stopped him. "You can barely ride. This needs planning, not passion. Every minute we plan, they could be alive." Ward interrupted. "The general wants you to charge in. It's a trap." Collins rode up fast from town. "The newspaper men are interested, but they want proof. Say they can't print allegations against a war hero without evidence." "Then we get them evidence," Wyatt said. He turned to the assembled group. "The general expects me to come through the front, guns blazing. So we give him what he expects and something he doesn't. He laid out the plan quickly. It was insane, probably suicidal, but it had one advantage. It was too crazy for the general to predict. As the moon rose, two groups moved toward Tucson. The first, led by Ward, took position openly where the militia could see them, an obvious assault force. The second, smaller group moved through shadows toward an entirely different target. The Tucson telegraph office was closed, but Wyatt had the lock picked in seconds. Inside, Tommy Sullivan and two other young men from the freed workers began their task setting up the telegraph to send simultaneously to every major newspaper from San Francisco to Washington. "You know Morse code?" Wyatt asked Tommy. "My dad was a telegraph operator before he died, taught me everything." "Then start sending. Everything, the ledgers, the names, the Phoenix auction plan. Send it all." Meanwhile, at the Majestic, Ward's group made themselves obvious, riding close enough to draw fire before retreating. The militia pursued, leaving the hotel less defended. That's when Talon's Apache struck not at the hotel, but at the militia's supply wagons, setting them ablaze. The explosion lit up the night sky, drawing everyone's attention. In the confusion, Wyatt and three others entered the hotel through a coal chute Lee Wei had remembered from his brother's time working there. They emerged in the basement, covered in black dust, but inside. Above them, they could hear running feet, shouts. The general was moving up his timeline, starting the evacuation early. They climbed service stairs, Wyatt fighting through pain with each step. On the second floor, they encountered two guards. Before Wyatt could draw, Lee Wei stepped forward and threw something powder that exploded in the guards' faces. They dropped unconscious. "Ancient Chinese medicine," Lee Wei said dryly. "Very effective." They found the hostages on the third floor, 17 people crammed into 2 rooms, including Rina, Mary, and Maria. The door was barred from outside, 2 guards posted. Wyatt shot one guard while Collins took the other. They pulled the bar free and opened the door. Rina flew into his arms. "You came. You doubted. Never. But Wyatt, it's a trap. The general is right here," a voice said behind them. General Wade stood in the hallway with a dozen men, all armed. Major Harrison beside him, smirking. "Mr. Hale, so predictable. Love makes fools of us all." The general raised his pistol. "Did you really think I'd leave them so lightly guarded?" "No," Wyatt said. "I thought you'd do exactly this." The general frowned, then his eyes brightened as he heard voices, many voices, coming up the main stairs. The hotel guests, roused by the newspapermen Ward had sent through the front door, were coming to see what the commotion was about. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice called out James Murphy, editor of the Tucson Telegraph, with several other journalists and half the hotel's guests behind him. "We've received reports of illegal imprisonment in this hotel." The general couldn't shoot now, not with 50 witnesses approaching. He lowered his weapon, fixed a politician's smile on his face. "A misunderstanding, I'm sure." Rina stepped forward, her voice carrying clear. "This man is holding 17 people as slaves. He plans to sell us in Phoenix. Check his rooms, the evidence is all there." Guests pushed forward, curious and horrified. A senator's wife gasped at the sight of the hostages, clearly abused, terrified, some branded like Rina. "This is preposterous," the general said, but sweat beaded on his forehead. Then Tommy Sullivan's voice crackled from below. "Mr. Hale, message sent. Every newspaper in the country has the story." The general's composure finally cracked. He raised his pistol toward Rina. "You destroyed everything." Wyatt moved faster than thought, throwing himself between them. The bullet took him in the chest, spinning him down. Rina screamed. The crowd erupted. Some of the general's men tried to run. Others surrendered. The general himself backed away but found Talon behind him, knife drawn. "For my cousin's village," Talon said quietly. "Wait." Ward pushed through the crowd. "He stands trial. Legal justice, remember." For a moment it balanced on a knife's edge. Then Talon lowered his blade. "Legal justice, but if he escapes?" "He won't," Ward promised, producing shackles. Rina knelt beside Wyatt, pressing her hands to his chest, blood seeping between her fingers. "Don't you die. You hear me? Don't you dare!" Wyatt's vision was fading, but he managed to focus on her face. "Worth it. You're worth it." Li Wei was there working frantically. "The bullet missed his heart, but barely. We need to move him now." As they carried Wyatt out, the hotel exploded in chaos. Guests demanded explanations. Journalists scribbled notes. The freed hostages wept with relief. And General Marcus Wade, war hero turned slaver, was led away in chains while photographers' flashes popped like gunfire. The story hit the morning papers with the force of a bomb. Slave ring exposed in Arizona territory. General Wade arrested. 17 saved from auction block. By noon, federal troops, real ones, had arrived. The territorial governor resigned in disgrace. Judge Harriman was arrested trying to flee to Mexico. The network Kane and Wade had built began to crumble as conspirators turned on each other to save themselves. But Wyatt knew none of this. He lay in Doc Bradshaw's surgery fighting for his life, while Rina held his hand and refused to leave his side. "He's strong," Bradshaw said on the third day, "but infection's setting in. Next 24 hours will tell." Rina hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. She talked to Wyatt constantly, telling him about the freed workers, about the trials starting, about the ranch. Some of them were planning to build together a place where branded souls could heal. "You need to see it," she whispered. "Need to help build it. You can't leave now, not when we're finally winning." On the fourth night, Wyatt's fever broke. He opened his eyes to find Rina asleep in the chair beside him, still holding his hand. Her face was gaunt with exhaustion, but even in sleep she looked fierce. "Rina," he croaked. She jerked awake, tears streaming. "You're back. Thank God you're back. The general, in jail awaiting trial. Kane too. The whole network's collapsing. Wyatt, we did it. We actually did it." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Not yet. Not till they hang." The trials took 2 months. Wyatt testified from a wheelchair, still too weak to stand for long. Rina's evidence, combined with the ledgers and testimony from dozens of freed workers, built an insurmountable case. Kane broke on the stand, ranting about the South, rising again until the judge had him removed. But it was the general who proved most damaging to himself. His arrogance wouldn't let him stay quiet. He implicated dozens of others, believing his connections would still save him. They didn't. On a cold December morning, both men hung for their crimes. Wyatt didn't attend, he'd seen enough death. But Rina went standing with the other survivors, bearing witness to the end of their tormentors. That afternoon, she found Wyatt at the ranch they'd started building, Haven, they called it. He was teaching one of the rescued children to ride, moving slow but steady. "It's done," she said simply. He nodded, understanding all she didn't say. "And now we build something better. We heal. We make sure this never happens again." 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Wyatt Hale and Rina Clarke married in the chapel they'd built at Haven Ranch. Marshall Ward performed the ceremony. Talon stood as best man. Mary Sullivan, her son Tommy, beside her, served as matron of honor. The crowd was unlike any wedding the territory had seen. Apache and Mexican, Chinese and Irish, former slaves and former soldiers, all united by shared struggle and shared hope. "Do you, Wyatt, take this woman every day for the rest of my life?" Wyatt interrupted, making Rina laugh. "You're supposed to wait for the question," she whispered. "Been waiting long enough." Later, as they danced while a former slave played fiddle and an Apache drummer kept time, Rina asked, "Any regrets about the solitude you gave up?" Wyatt looked around at Haven Ranch, at the dormitories for healing souls, the school Rina had started, the fields where people worked for wages and dignity, then back at his wife. "Ask me in a year," he said, echoing their old joke. "I will, every year. And I'll give you the same answer, not a single regret, except maybe not finding you sooner." As the sun set over the Arizona mountains, painting the sky in shades of redemption, The ghost of Juniper Hollow finally laid his ghosts to rest. He'd found something better than forgetting. He'd found a way to remember that led to healing instead of hate. The first winter at Haven Ranch tested everything they'd built. Snow came early and heavy, trapping them for weeks. Food stores ran low, and some of the rescued workers, still learning to trust, again hoarded what little they had, creating tension that threatened to tear their fragile community apart. Wyatt found Rina in the barn at dawn, distributing the last of their grain to the horses. Her hands shook from cold, but her jaw was set with determination. "We need supplies," she said without preamble. "The children won't last another week on what we have. Roads are impassable, snow's too deep. Then we make them passable." That afternoon, something remarkable happened. Tommy Sullivan organized the younger men to dig. The Apache, led by Talon, showed them how to pack snow for easier travel. The Chinese workers, under Li Wei's direction, improvised sleds from barn doors. By nightfall, they'd cleared a path halfway to Iron Mesa. But it was what happened next that truly mattered. Mrs. Chen, one of the rescued workers who'd barely spoken since arriving, stood up during dinner and placed her hidden cache of food on the communal table. "We share," she said simply in broken English. "Family shares." Others followed. Hidden supplies appeared from everywhere, under beds, behind loose boards, in empty grain sacks. Not much, but enough. The hoarding stopped because trust, that most fragile of crops, had finally taken root. 3 days later, when they finally broke through to Iron Mesa, they found the town had been preparing supply wagons, waiting for the path to clear. Marshal Ward stood at the lead wagon, grinning. "Thought you might need these," he said, gesturing at supplies enough for 3 months. "Territory owes you that much, at least." But there was something in his expression that made Wyatt wary. "What's wrong, Ethan?" Ward's smile faded. "Got word from Phoenix. There's been an escape from the territorial prison." Rina's hand found Wyatt's arm. "Kane?" "No. Kane's still locked tight. But 6 of his men broke out, including Boone. Guards said they were heading this direction." That night, Wyatt doubled the watch and walked the perimeter despite his still healing chest. The bullet wound ached in the cold, a constant reminder of choices made and prices paid. He found Talon on the north ridge, nearly invisible against the snow. "They're out there," Talon said quietly. "My scouts found tracks 5 miles east. They're circling, looking for weakness." "How many?" 6, like Ward said. "But Wyatt, they've got dynamite. Stolen from a mining camp." The implications chilled worse than the wind. One well-placed explosion could destroy the dormitories, the school, everything they'd built. More importantly, it could kill dozens of innocent people who'd already suffered enough. "We can't wait for them to attack," Wyatt decided. "We go hunting. Your chest will hurt whether I'm sitting or riding. Get 5 of your best. We leave in an hour." But Rina was waiting at the barn, already dressed for riding, rifle in hand. "Don't even try to talk me out of it. You're needed here. Mary can manage the ranch. You're needed alive, and you're still not healed enough to face Boone alone." She was right, and they both knew it. They rode out as snow began falling again. Wyatt, Rina, Talon, and 5 Apache warriors. The trail was easy enough to follow at first, but Boone was smart. He doubled back several times, split his group to confuse pursuit. They found the first trap at Miller's Creek Dynamite, rigged to a tree over the narrow trail. If they'd been riding fast, they'd have triggered it. Talon disarmed it carefully while Wyatt studied the setup. "Military placement," he observed. "Boone learned something from Kane after all." "Or Kane's not as locked up as we think," Rina said darkly. They pressed on through deepening snow. Near sunset, they found where Boone's group had camped still warm ashes, empty tins, and something else that made Rina gasp. A piece of cloth with a message written in charcoal. "The girl for the ranch. Midnight. Eagle's Point." "They want a trade," Talon said. "You for everyone's safety." "Then they'll get one," Rina said. Absolutely not. Wyatt's voice was steel. We don't trade lives. We don't let others die for us either. An argument erupted, but it was cut short by gunfire from the ridge above. They dove for cover as bullets whined off rocks. Boone had circled behind them while they'd followed his false trail. "Clever, Hale," Boone's voice echoed off the canyon walls. "But not clever enough." Wyatt counted muzzle flashes, 5 guns, not 6. Where was the 6th man? He got his answer when dynamite exploded on the trail behind them, sealing their retreat. They were trapped in the canyon with night falling. Talon's men spread out, finding what cover they could, returning fire sporadically to conserve ammunition. But their position was bad, lower ground, limited cover, nowhere to run. "We can climb," one of the Apache suggested, pointing at the canyon wall. It was steep, but not impossible. "You can," Wyatt agreed. "Take 2 men, flank them from above. Rest of us keep them focused here." As 3 warriors began their dangerous climb, disappearing into shadow, Wyatt heard something that made his blood freeze. Horses approaching from the sealed trail, lots of them. Had Boone brought reinforcements? But then a familiar voice called out, "Wyatt Hale, Rina Clarke, you folks need help." Ward, the marshal, had followed with a posse. The explosion that sealed the trail had also marked their location perfectly. The tide turned quickly. Boone's men, realizing they were now outnumbered and about to be flanked, tried to retreat. 2 surrendered immediately. 2 others ran directly into Talon's climbers. The 5th Boone himself made a desperate charge down the slope toward Rina, knife drawn, moving faster than seemed possible for such a large man. Wyatt's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Rina's shot, a heartbeat later, took him in the knee. Boone fell screaming curses, still trying to crawl toward them, until Ward's men restrained him. "Should have stayed in prison, Silas," Ward said mildly. "Now you'll hang for sure." But as they secured the prisoners, Talon held up a hand for silence. "Listen." In the distance, carried on the wind, screaming, from the direction of Haven Ranch. They rode hard through darkness and snow horses, lathered with sweat despite the cold. The screaming had stopped, which was somehow worse. As they crested the final ridge, they could see flames, not the ranch buildings, but something burning in the main yard. It was a cross, burning like something out of the worst stories from the South. But the ranch still stood, and as they thundered through the gates, Wyatt saw why. The residents had armed themselves with whatever they could find, tools, kitchen knives, even boards pulled from fences. They'd stood together, Apache and Mexican, Chinese and Irish, former slaves and poor whites, united against whoever had tried to terrorize them. At their head stood Mary Sullivan, holding a shotgun that still smoked. At her feet lay a body. "The 6th man," she said simply. "Thought he'd scare us while you were gone. Thought wrong." The body was one of Boone's crew, shot clean through when he'd tried to light the dormitory on fire after setting up his burning cross. The residents had responded not with fear, but with fury. Tommy Sullivan was already organizing a bucket brigade to douse the cross. "Let it burn out," his mother said. "Let everyone see it defeated." That night, as Ward took the prisoners back to town, Wyatt stood with Rina, watching the last embers of the cross die in the snow. Around them, the residents of Haven Ranch were celebrating not with drink or violence, but with shared stories, shared meals, shared strength. "They didn't need us," Rina observed. "They protected themselves." "That's the point," Wyatt replied. "We're not saving them anymore. They're saving themselves." Spring brought unexpected visitors, a delegation from Washington led by a stern woman named Margaret Standish from something called the Federal Commission on Territorial Affairs. She arrived with ledgers and questions investigating everything from the land claims to the funding sources. "This is highly irregular," she announced on her first day surveying the mixed population of Haven Ranch. "Federal funds being used to support this. This," Rina said carefully, "is rehabilitation and integration of trafficking victims. It's a powder keg. Mixing races, classes, backgrounds, it goes against natural order. Wyatt stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. Ma'am, the natural order you're talking about is what allowed Kane and Wade to operate for years. Maybe it's time for a new order. Standish studied him with sharp eyes. You're the soldier who exposed the network. War hero, they say. War survivor. There's a difference. She spent 3 days interviewing residents, reviewing records, observing daily life. What she saw challenged everything she'd expected: children of different races playing together, former slaves teaching former soldiers to read, Apache traditions being shared alongside Irish songs. It was Tommy Sullivan who finally broke through her reserve. She found him teaching mathematics to a group of younger children using Apache counting songs Lee Way had translated into English. This is unusual pedagogy, she observed. It works, Tommy replied simply. They learn better when they're not afraid, when they see their own people's wisdom valued. That evening, Standish found Rina in the garden. They'd started medicinal herbs that Lee Way knew, food plants the Apache cultivated vegetables the Irish and Mexican workers preferred. This shouldn't work, Standish said bluntly, but it does. For how long? When the novelty wears off, when resources run low, when old prejudices resurface. Rina knelt pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. Every day we make it work is a day that proves it's possible. That's all anyone can do, make today better than yesterday. Before leaving, Standish pulled Wyatt and Ward aside. There are those in Washington who want to shut this down. They see it as dangerous precedent. And you? Ward asked. I see it as necessary evolution. The report I file will determine federal support for the next 5 years. She paused, looking at the children playing in the yard. Make sure I have good things to report. Summer brought a different kind of crisis. Disease swept through, scarlet fever hitting the children hardest. The town doctor refused to come, claiming he couldn't risk infection to his regular patients. Lee Way worked without sleep, using knowledge both traditional and modern, but supplies ran low. Medicine had to come from Phoenix, and no one would transport it to a colony of undesirables. It was Talon who provided the solution, riding out with his warriors to negotiate with the supply company. They returned with full wagons, and when Ward asked how they'd managed it, Talon smiled, reminded them that Apache have long memories and loose definitions of property rights. 3 children died before the fever broke. They buried them on the hill overlooking the valley, a Chinese boy, an Irish girl, a Mexican infant. The entire ranch attended traditions, blending as each culture offered its own rituals for the dead. This is what defeat looks like, Wyatt said that night, exhausted and grieving. No, Rina corrected. This is what fighting looks like. Defeat would be not trying at all. Fall arrived with news that shocked everyone. President Hayes himself would be touring the territories, and Haven Ranch was on his itinerary. The visit was Margaret Standish's doing. Her report had intrigued him enough to see for himself. Preparations were frantic. Buildings were repaired, painted, cleaned. But more importantly, the residents prepared their stories. Each person who wanted to speak with the president wrote or dictated their experience, their hopes, their proof that America could be better than its worst impulses. The president arrived with minimal fanfare. He'd insisted on a small escort, wanting to see reality, not pageantry. He was older than Wyatt expected, tired-looking, carrying the weight of a nation still healing from war. He toured the facilities, spoke with residents, observed classes. But it was the evening meal that seemed to affect him most. Sitting at a long table with former slaves and former Confederate soldiers, Apache warriors and Chinese doctors, Irish refugees and Mexican farmers, all sharing food and conversation. Mr. Hale, the president said quietly, I fought in the war. I saw what hatred does. This is what I hoped peace would look like. It's what it could look like everywhere, Rina added boldly, if people had the courage to try. The president smiled. Mrs. Hale, you remind me why I prefer the frontier to Washington. People here still believe in impossible things. Before leaving, he pulled Wyatt aside privately. There are forces gathering back east, industrialists who profit from division, politicians who build power on fear. What you've built here threatens them. Be ready. We've fought worse. Have you? Kane and Wade were criminals. These men write laws. That winter, the president's warning proved prophetic. New federal regulations arrived restricting mixed-race education, limiting property rights for former slaves, requiring separate but equal facilities. We can't comply with this, Ward said, reading the regulations. It would destroy everything. Then we don't comply, Wyatt replied. That's rebellion against federal law. No, it's following a higher law, the one that says all people are created equal. They held a ranch meeting that night. The vote was unanimous. They would continue as they were, regardless of consequences. The federal marshals arrived in spring, sent to enforce compliance. But they found something unexpected: the entire town of Iron Mesa standing with Haven Ranch. Even those who'd initially opposed the ranch had seen its success, how it had brought prosperity and peace to the region. The lead marshal, a young man named Davidson, clearly didn't want to be there. I have orders, he said miserably, and I have principles, Wyatt replied. Arrest us all, if you must. It was Rina who proposed the solution. What if we're not a federal facility, but a private cooperative? No federal funds, no federal oversight. You'd lose all support. We'd keep our integrity. The transformation wasn't easy. Federal support had been crucial, but as word spread, private donations arrived from abolitionists in Boston, progressive churches in Philadelphia, even former Union soldiers who remembered Wyatt from the war. Kane sent a letter from prison, gleeful about their struggles. You see, the natural order reasserts itself. You've delayed the inevitable, nothing more. Wyatt burned the letter without showing Rina. Some voices didn't deserve to be heard. By the second summer at Haven Ranch, patterns had emerged that no one expected. Marriages across racial lines, not many, but enough to show possibility. Children who spoke 3 or 4 languages, switching easily between them. Agricultural techniques that blended Apache knowledge with Chinese farming and Irish animal husbandry, producing yields that amazed neighboring ranches. We're creating something new, Li Wei observed one evening. Not Chinese or Irish or Apache or American, but something that hasn't existed before. Is that good? Tommy Sullivan asked. Ask me in 10 years. The old doctor smiled. If we survive that long, it's good. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. Gold was discovered on the land adjacent to Haven Ranch, and suddenly everyone wanted them gone. Miners, speculators, even some territorial officials who'd supported them before. Marcus Holbrook, a mining magnate from San Francisco, made an offer, $50,000 for the ranch. Take it and relocate your experiment elsewhere. Not for sale, Wyatt said flatly. Everything's for sale, Mr. Hale. It's just a matter of price or pressure. The pressure came in forms both subtle and blatant. Wells were poisoned, they had to post guards. Supply wagons were robbed. They had to send armed escorts. Several residents were beaten in town. They had to travel in groups. But it was the legal pressure that nearly broke them. Holbrook had connections, and suddenly Haven Ranch faced lawsuits, land claims, water rights, zoning violations. Fighting them would cost money they didn't have. We could take his offer, Mary Sullivan said, during one particularly dark meeting. Use the money to start over somewhere else. Run again. Rina's voice was sharp. How many times do we run before we stand? Standing might get us all killed, someone pointed out. Then we die standing, Tommy said, surprising everyone. Sorry, Ma, but I'm tired of running. This is our home. The room erupted in argument, but it was Talon who silenced them with a single gesture. The Apache have something to say. He stood, and with him rose every Apache resident of Haven Ranch. This land was ours before any of you came. We could claim it, fight for it, probably win in federal court with the right lawyer. Instead, he paused, looking at each face. We give it freely to the cooperative. All residents become equal owners. Try to take land from one of us, you take from all of us. The legal complexities took months to sort out, but Holbrook's lawyers finally admitted defeat. You couldn't easily steal land from a cooperative that included Apache with treaty rights, former slaves with federal protection, and war veterans with political connections. But Holbrook wasn't finished. If he couldn't take the land legally, he'd take it by force. The attack came on a moonless night in late autumn, 20 hired guns against a ranch of farmers and refugees. The battle that followed became legend in the territory. Every resident fought women with kitchen knives, children with slings, elderly men with ancient rifles. Wyatt, despite Rina pulling him back, led the defense from the main barn, turning it into a fortress. But it was the unexpected reinforcements that turned the tide. Word had spread to Iron Mesa, and the town came not just Ward and his deputies, but shopkeepers, ranchers, even some of Holbrook's own miners who'd grown disgusted with his methods. The most surprising arrival was Margaret Standish, carrying a federal injunction and backed by a dozen federal troops. "Mr. Holbrook," she announced calmly while bullets still flew. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, attempted murder, and violation of federal civil rights laws. You can't. I have connections. Had connections. The president sends his regards and suggests you enjoy your time in federal prison." The battle ended with Holbrook in chains and his hired guns scattered or captured. But the cost had been high, 3 dead, including old Lee Way, who died protecting the children's dormitory. They buried him next to the children on the hill, with honors from every culture represented at Haven Ranch. His last words, Tommy reported, had been in English, "Worth it." Winter came early again, but this time they were ready. Supplies were ample, buildings reinforced, and most importantly, the community was united in a way that transcended its origins as a refuge camp. On Christmas Eve, a holiday not all residents celebrated, but all respected, Rina stood before the gathered community with news that would change everything. "I'm pregnant," she announced simply. The celebration that followed could probably be heard in Mexico, but later in private she confessed her fears to Wyatt. "What kind of world are we bringing a child into?" "The one we're building," he replied, "day by day, choice by choice. And if we fail, then we'll have tried. That's all anyone can do." Spring brought the baby a daughter they named Hope, which everyone agreed was a bit obvious, but perfect nonetheless. She was born into a community that saw her not as Wyatt and Rina's child, but as everyone's, tended by Apache grandmothers, sung to in Chinese, taught Irish dancing before she could properly walk. It was Marshal Ward who brought the news that would define their future. "Kane's dead, killed in prison by another inmate. But before he died, he said something, claimed there were documents hidden at Raven Rock that would destroy some very powerful people." "Let the dead bury the dead," Wyatt said, watching Hope play with Tommy Sullivan's young son. "That's not like you. I'm not who I was. None of us are." But Rina disagreed. That night she argued that the documents might protect Haven Ranch, might expose others still operating in shadows. Eventually, Wyatt agreed to one last journey to Raven Rock. They found the documents hidden in Kane's former office, not just evidence of his crimes, but a whole network reaching to Washington, names and dates and payments that would indeed destroy careers and possibly change laws. "We could use these," Ward said, "blackmail for protection." "Or we could publish them," Rina suggested, "end it completely." "That would make enemies we can't fight." "We already have those." They voted the entire ranch community, and the decision was unanimous. Publish everything. The truth complete and undeniable regardless of consequences. The publication caused a sensation. 3 senators resigned. A Supreme Court justice retired suddenly. New laws were passed, not perfect, but better. And Haven Ranch, that impossible experiment, became a symbol of what America could be when it chose courage over comfort. 5 years after that bloody night in the canyon, Wyatt stood again on the ridge where he'd first saved Rina. But now she stood beside him, hope on her hip, watching the sun set over a valley transformed. Where once there had been only his solitary cabin, now spread a community of over 200 souls. The school had 3 teachers. The medical clinic served the entire region. The cooperative farm was the most productive in the territory. Regrets? Rina asked, echoing their old ritual. Ask me next year, he replied, but his smile said everything. You'll say the same thing, every year until I die. Hope reached for him, and he took her, this child born of violence, redeemed into peace, of hatred, transformed into love. In her mixed heritage, Rina's Eastern Jewish roots, she'd finally revealed Wyatt's Scottish-Irish blood, lived the future they'd all fought for. As they walked back toward the ranch, they passed the cemetery on the hill. 23 graves now, each representing a life given for the dream of Haven Ranch. But from the main house came laughter music, the sound of children playing, proof that those sacrifices had meaning. That night, as every night, Wyatt made his rounds, checking locks, watching horizons. Old habits died hard, but now others walked with him, former slaves who'd become leaders, Apache warriors who'd become teachers, Chinese doctors who'd become family. You know, Tommy Sullivan said, falling into step beside him, my ma asked me to thank you again. For what? For that day in the canyon, for choosing to act when you could have walked away. Anyone would have. No, Tommy interrupted. They wouldn't have. Most people never do. That's what makes the difference, not the big heroic moments, but the small choice to care when it's easier not to. They completed the rounds in companionable silence, 2 generations united by shared struggle and shared hope. At the main gate, they met Talon returning from a scout. All quiet, Wyatt asked. For now. But there are always new Kanes out there, new Wades. The fight's never really over. No, Wyatt agreed. But neither are we. As they headed inside, where warmth and light and family waited, a rider approached a young black man wearing a deputy's badge. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, sent me to find you. Says dinner's ready, and if you're late again, you'll be sleeping in the barn. Wyatt laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. Can't have that. Come on, boys, let's go home. And home, it was not just a place, but a promise, not just a ranch, but a revolution, not just a refuge, but a glimpse of America's better angels. The ghost of Juniper Hollow had found his peace not in forgetting, but in building something worth remembering. As they entered the main house, Hope ran to him, calling, Papa, in 3 languages, and Wyatt Hale knew with certainty that every scar, every wound, every ghost had been worth this moment, this child, this woman, this impossible, improbable, absolutely essential proof that love could triumph over hate, that courage could overcome fear, and that sometimes, just sometimes, ordinary people doing extraordinary things could change the world. The cloth that had once hidden Rina's scars now hung framed in their bedroom, transformed from symbol of shame to badge of honor, reminder that some things were worth uncovering no matter how much it hurt, because truth, difficult, dangerous, necessary truth, was the only foundation on which to build a future worth living.